Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for those people who are dealing with an Aries person who may be a narcissist or beyond that spectrum of toxic behavior that is in the vicinity of narcissism. In other words, extreme self-absorption. In some cases, it can be actually malignant towards other people because self-absorption, that's irritating, but that's not necessarily as harmful as somebody who is very, destructive to others with their behavioral patterns. So I don't claim to be a mental health expert, psychologist, anything in that field. I'm not trying to diagnose anyone. I'm using labels in order to get my points across. And the bottom line is that we're talking here about very destructive behavior that impacts others negatively. And of course, if it's really on the extreme end, this is not a good thing to even try to cope with, because obviously you're going to experience a lot of adverse effects from somebody else's dysfunctional and destructive behavior. What I'm talking about is perhaps the more manageable, mild cases than the very extreme cases of narcissism. But even the more mild cases can sometimes be rather difficult. So we're talking about Aries here, and I made a little list on my own of what I think might be happening with them. Before I continue, I just want to say also that the reason I'm doing this series is because I have been learning more about narcissistic abuse and how it affects others. And it's really opened up my eyes to a lot of things in my life. So I might be a little bit self-indulgent here doing this because I've already done a series linking astrology to narcissism, and I will link those videos below in case you're interested. I did it by the elements, and so I decided to kind of expound upon those and do it for each sign, and also talk about how people from different elements may be impacted by it in their specific ways. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about with the sign of Aries, we're talking about a cardinal fire sign, okay? I just, as disclosure here, I'm a fire sign too. I'm a Sagittarian, and Leo is the other fire signs. In all of these readings that I do, I'm not going to be picking on anybody. I do get people who say, I think you have something in for my sign, and I have to almost laugh because I say this about every sign, but they're not looking at every sign. They're just like listening for their own signs. So they just assume that I'm focusing on them. And as a fire sign, I can say that all fire signs have a little bit of self-absorption in them, or a lot, because we are signs that are very self-expressive. And this is why creativity is linked to fire signs, and the wands and the tarot are linked to fire, is because it's all about creativity. And creativity is generated by self-expression. You're taking your own experiences in life, your own thoughts, feelings, whatever, and channeling it into art. Okay, so that kind of can be extended to anything in life, is that fire signs will tend to be very much into their own point of view because they're also very independent. and don't want to be influenced by other people, want to be, proud to be their own person, okay? So there's a healthy version of that. It's not going to be always just bad. An Aries person who is a narc, we'll just shorten it, is somebody who tends to be self-absorbed to the extent where they can't be interested in what you're interested in. So, by the way, I'm doing this. This is not just for your spouse, your partner. This can be your parent. This can be a sibling that you always have wanted to really connect with, and you just can't because of their negative behavioral pattern. Is that they tend to be very self-absorbed and they don't seem like they're interested in you. And what happens usually? They're always talking about themselves. And I noticed in my own life that I have attracted people like that. Thankfully, not my partner, who is also, he's a fellow Sagittarian like I am, but other people, like friends types of things or acquaintances, where they always were talking about themselves. And I've noticed this in different areas of life, and it really sucks, to put it mildly, because when you're having a conversation with somebody, you don't want to hear a monologue. You want to have an exchange of ideas and for somebody else to care about what you're into as well. So that could be like a red flag for you if you're dealing with that type of individual. Another thing is that these are people who are extremely competitive. And this may also be part of the not listening to what you're into, because they may tell you about all of their accomplishments or what have you. And you may give them, great strokes and say, "Congratulations, that's wonderful." And what do? And then you say, "Oh, by the way, I got a promotion at work," and they just, completely gloss over it. Don't say, maybe they might say, "Oh, that's cool," and then go back into talking about themselves. Obviously, that's going to feel like a one-sided relationship, and that could be a red flag. There also, I just, didn't write this down, but I'm thinking in my mind, another thing about them is they can be extremely arrogant and feel superior to others. And this is a form to me of competitiveness, where somebody has a hard time just seeing that everybody has talents, abilities. They have to be the one that is on top. Now, this is really true for Aries because Aries is the first house. So they're looking out for number one, especially. Leo is another sign that gets pegged with narcissistic traits and also arrogance of the fire signs, and I'll obviously be doing that too. But with Aries, there is a very definite desire to be on top, number one, and things like that. And that type of arrogance can lead to demeaning other people. So not only are they wanting to be number one, but that person, they're not really that good, or they kind of like, or even you, if you're in a relationship with them and something good has happened to you, they may take you down a peg by demeaning your accomplishment in whatever way. And they may do it if they have, in some cases, this may not even be conscious within them. They might have Mercury in Pisces, and they have that more subtle way of kind of doing it, where they say, is that something that position that you have, is that something that is considered, part of the management, or are you still an employee, and just kind of like throw a little shade subtly to kind of get you to question your accomplishment. Maybe it wasn't as great as I thought it was. And do it. Usually Aries people are very in your face, and they're almost clumsily in your face, where it's very transparent that they're doing what they're doing. But some of them, if they have elements that are more clever or subtle, or even premeditated, like a moon in Scorpio, for instance, they can get inside of people's heads more effectively and get you to question your own value. Another very common trait is the tendency to be very pushy and overbearing. Aries is ruled by Mars, the god of war. Like I said before, Aries is a cardinal sign, so that's a take charge type of a sign, and a fire sign. Fire signs are very aggressive or assertive, whichever one they're doing, whether they're doing the positive version or the negative version. So an Aries person, that Mars energy, being that warrior energy, is just kind of like really can be pushy, and that can be very uncomfortable. I mean, we could be talking too about the moon in Aries. I might include that. I think I should include that as well, because I think that can definitely be with the emotional nature. And these types of people, they are very controlling. They want what they want when they want it, and they don't take no for an answer. And if you've ever dealt with somebody like that, I'm going to talk about kind of tips how you can deal with these types of people. Maybe this is your boss. I don't know if you would know what your boss's sign is, but these kinds of people, they're very overbearing, and I always say like they really like affect our power chakra, which is the third chakra is the power chakra, the Manipura. And that is very, that's where your stomach area is, the solar plexus region. And what happens is it becomes very, like, sometimes people get stomach aches when they feel like somebody's trying to control them, or, it can manifest as feeling butterflies in the stomach. If you feel disempowered, you may feel like that. Fear can show up as butterflies in the stomach. But dealing with an overbearing person, especially if you were raised with somebody like this, can feel like extremely uncomfortable. Other people can deal with them better than those who have dealt with a parent like this, because it triggers that kind of feeling of loss of power. Another thing that they do, which I feel is concerning, is using anger as an intimidation tactic. You may have heard the term narcissistic rage, and I'll get to the fifth one, which is vindictiveness, but narcissistic rage, but just rage in general, is like a 2-year-old. And sometimes Aries are compared to, or any narc is compared to like a toddler in terms of their emotional ability to kind of relate to others, is that they have a very primitive, undeveloped sense of, handling other people, not giving them what they want. You may have seen YouTube videos of people who get kicked off of airplanes because they refuse to do very simple things. People who are narcissistic can be extremely uncooperative, and I could have put that for Aries as well, because Aries people hate taking orders. Okay, so they fare much better working for themselves because of this, because they're not very cooperative. And so in a similar vein, if they are forced to follow rules because, like when you're in an airplane, they're meant for safety reasons. These are the kinds of people who will, pitch a fit. And it can be an epic fit. But, just like dealing with a toddler, they cannot be allowed to run over people because that just feeds into their feeling of entitlement. That's the thing. We could say a sense of entitlement, and that's a form of arrogance. When I get to Leo, I'll pull out all the stops for that because I think these are going to be, this is important to understand. These are Aries narcissists. This is not about all Aries are narcissists. So I wanted to make that clear. But anyway, using anger as an intimidation tactic can be very effective because especially if somebody has been physically abused growing up, that can be so triggering for them that they kind of become paralyzed emotionally and they freeze. And it's like, take what you want. It's like if somebody sticks a gun to somebody's head, a person freezes. Here, have my wallet, have whatever you want. I don't, I'm terrified, So that's how triggering can affect certain people. And they use this because it is effective, and they strong arm people if they are really that far gone. And I'm not saying that every form of anger is necessarily physical, like violence or anything like that. It doesn't have to be. It can just be, having a temper tantrum, blowing up, going off. What's the other term? Like just losing it. Screaming at people like a boss that thinks that the way that they can get their employees to ship up is by screaming. And sometimes they feel like they get what they want because they intimidate the employee into kind of surrendering and doing what they feel like they should do. And then I get to the last one that I typed out, which was vindictiveness. And I used to think that Scorpio, held the record or had that title or attached to them, or that accusation of being vindictive, and that can be true. But I have kind of revised this to include Aries. And now I'm beginning to think that a lot of this has to do with the fact that Scorpio is also ruled by Mars in addition to Pluto. Now, Pluto definitely can be about trying to, like cause and effect in the universe, and maybe trying to almost play God of being the one that delivers the effect. But in terms of Aries, this thing of might makes right, and, getting people back. And again, this is to kind of have that control. So an example would be as simple as somebody leaves the Aries, their spouse, their partner, leaves the Aries person, and the Aries goes around on a smear campaign. So I'm not suggesting, violence or anything like that. It doesn't have to be that severe, but the Aries person may go around and badmouth this person everywhere they go as a way of trying to turn other people against the person who left them. And that can be a form of vindictiveness. If it's a boss and the employee finally quits and says, take this job and shove it, you're an abusive a-hole. I don't want to work for you anymore. If they really kind of give it to the boss when they quit, that boss can call up everybody in town and say, look, this employee, just quit. They might even lie about it and say they stole from me and now they're going to go and try to get a job from you. Don't fall for it. They're bad news. To try to punish them for having the audacity to leave them. So, yes, that could definitely affect people adversely. I mean, you can't even leave such a person without having to pay the price. So, let's talk about how you can cope with such a person. First of all, as I stated earlier, if it's really a dangerous situation, and not just dangerous to you physically, but to your mental health, really consider, why do I have to be in a relationship with this person? For some reason, now that I've been doing the tarot for so long, I've been thinking in terms of swords. I think about the Seven of Swords. You have to sometimes leave a person without letting them know that you've left. And I think that with Aries, you might get away with it because sometimes they're not paying attention to the little details and they're so self-absorbed that you might be able to kind of slip away and not make a big scene about it. But you don't want to question, you don't want to get into the mud with these people and start to do a tear down campaign to them, or to challenge them in that way. Because think about it, with anyone who is like this, there is deep self-loathing that is very much likely inside, deep insecurities. And there's a twofold reason we don't want to do this. First of all, we want to have compassion even when somebody has made life for us a living hell. We want to be better than that. We don't want to go down to their level, for one thing, but we also want to see the bigger picture of that hurt people hurt people. That's very true. But just because that is true doesn't mean we have to be around such people. So if you have to leave, try to do so in a very casual sort of way. Don't make a big dramatic scene over it. Yes, I'm talking about you, Scorpio. Yes, I'm talking about you, Leo, and the other fire signs, and the air signs who may get in a good jab now and then. Just resign yourself to the fact that this relationship is not going to work out and leave. Now, you can't leave a parent in the way that you can a spouse. So that is always going to be more complicated no matter what sign it is. If you're dealing with a parent and you're both adults now, and the parent is extremely controlling and doesn't allow you to have any kind of differing opinions, different way of living. They're always trying to impose upon you, and arrogance. Maybe they're put-down artists and they're always putting you down. You can, go low contact, which means that you're not seeing them very often. You don't tolerate that. That's a very difficult thing to balance. But sometimes it's a necessary thing for you to wean off of that relationship before perhaps, chucking it all together. Even with the parent-child relationship, it's always sad, but sometimes it's necessary to not be affected by that. If it's a boss, obviously you can walk out, but you may like what you're doing. You may feel like, why should this person bully me into leaving? And I have to lose a job I love because of this person. So the thing is that it all depends on how it's affecting you. As I said, these traits are on a spectrum. Some people are just mildly self-absorbed and it's annoying, but they have good qualities and they basically are good people, and they're not trying to hurt anyone. They just are very self-absorbed. And some people are pushy in the same thing. It's part of their personality. I'm talking about Aries people. And they're pushy, and you can even joke about it, and you realize it's not coming from a really negative place. It's just them trying to get their needs met. But then there's the more toxic variety. And the thing is that you may like the job, but the person goes along with the job, and unless you want to wage war and go over their head, complain about them to the higher management, and do all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's always an option, but I certainly wouldn't go that route, because I don't want to have that in my life, that kind of negativity. So I would probably just leave and find something that was more compatible. But you have to do what you feel is correct. I just think that if you feel like, okay, this person is pretty toxic, but I want to stay for X, Y, or Z reasons, I can't leave. You may feel like you can't, that there's an actual reason. Maybe you're not working at all. Perhaps you're a stay-at-home parent living with an Aries narcissist, and you don't feel like you can just up and leave. So in that case, one thing that I would suggest to you is that you do not allow this person to talk down to you. Now, that's not going to stop them. You can't control what other people do. But if that person says something, you said, I am proud of my accomplishments, and I'm not going to let you demean them. If the person starts talking about themselves after you've listened to them, and you just say something about your life, say, excuse me, I was telling you what the good things that happened to me today. I listened to you, and I expect you to listen to me. And you kind of try to train them. If they, balk at that, then you just say, well, it looks like you're not interested in an equal type of exchange. So I'm going to just, do whatever. And I'm going to, if you're living with them, I'm going to go in the other room right now. And I'm going to, just kind of separate yourself from them. And keep pushing back in that sense. But I don't believe that we should ever engage in an insult fest or anything like that. Anything like, if they try to demean you, it's not a good idea to go and try to demean them and give them a taste of their own medicine. Because that is really, when somebody does hate themselves, it just triggers more rage, that they are being made aware of their faults, which they already, feel bad about themselves. And some people get tricked because they're the ones being aggressive and think, oh, they must really be full of themselves, when in fact they really have low self-esteem. And therefore, you don't want to kind of poke the tiger with the low self-esteem by kind of, especially, some of them may have been abused by their parents, probably a lot of them. And so that's not, you don't want to kind of do that to them, even if you think that they deserve it. But you have the right to kind of defend yourself, and that means being very very simple. You don't have to be very wordy and say, I'm talking now. I listen to you, like you would do for a 2-year-old. So if they are using anger as an intimidation tactic, leave the premises. I mean, sometimes you might be, but leave the space where they're doing this, saying, I'll talk to you when you're willing to calm down. I'm not going to talk to you if you're yelling at me, or if you're, punching out the wall or whatever. I'm not going to honor that. So these kinds of things can be a way to deal with it, so that you don't feel like you're losing your sense of self. If you're a water sign, you may feel like you can get that approval if you love them harder. It doesn't work like that. You have to become more detached and not as willing to Because in a way, what you're doing is you're believing that you're causing this, and you're not causing it. This is within them. And they need to like kind of confront their own demons. But this is not for you to take responsibility about. And if you're a fire sign, that's why I said don't fight fire with fire, because then you're going to create an inferno. Be, like the water signs, be more detached. Don't fall for the okie doke, because Aries people love to fight. So that's another thing I could have said, is that they are, because they're, an Aries energy vampire, because I think all narcissists are energy vampires, are people who love to start fights. They might just be argumentative, but sometimes they might say provocative things in order to get somebody to take a swing at them, and then they will, do it to them. So they have an excuse to beat somebody up because they have a lot of aggression within them. Aries in general, even the people who are more well-balanced, you will notice that they have a very high energy level. And some of it has kind of anger mixed in because Mars is about anger, okay? But even if they're not really angry about something, they can still have that kind of combative energy. And so if you're dealing with a difficult child, for instance, who is an Aries, you can get them into a lot of physical activity, including boxing. I personally don't like professional boxing because I think it's pretty barbaric to hit people, even if they agree to be hit. But, things that can get out that aggression, maybe football, I guess, but things like that, where they can also exercise their competitive streak. But don't fall for it and allow yourself to get sucked into arguments or, just screaming matches. If you're an air sign, don't be intimidated by their anger. Air signs hate a lot of emotional displays and things like that. Understand that the toddler is having their temper tantrum, and just as you would do for any toddler, let them, well, actually, if you were a parent, you might actually remove the child from the public arena where they might be doing it. Because one thing it's very interesting is, I don't know if this is true for toddlers, I don't have children, but it seems like toddlers do tend, when they have temper tantrums, that they do tend to do it in public places. And I don't think that they are deliberately trying to embarrass their parents, but sometimes parents get very embarrassed if they feel that their children are acting up, so to speak. I believe that the narcissist does have these public outbursts on purpose because they want to humiliate their partner. They may try to get their partner into a screaming match in like a restaurant, so that the other person will look bad in two different ways. So they will look bad if they are taking this crap from this person and having them, scream names at them, and also if they get sucked into it and then they act like an idiot too in public. So those two things can happen, and the narcissist loves the drama, loves it. So don't feed the narcissist because they're looking for supply and that sort of thing. If you are an earth sign, you may be like the air signs, where you're just trying to be logical and deal with the person in a detached way. I would say with earth signs, don't kind of like minimize it, because you might, and the same thing can be said for air signs. You might be so detached that you don't realize how much it's negatively impacting you. So anyway, I hope that this brings some clarity about problem people who are Aries. I could have said, yeah, maybe I'll label it as problem personalities, because people get so hung up on, what an exact label is. But in any case, if you would like a private reading, like an astrological reading, for instance, I have a link to my online store below. Take care. Bye.